Thank you so much, Rui. Yeah, no, I'm not that old. Please, please, please. Yeah, I was there 5 years ago, actually, for the first new craft, which was at the time called Endcraft. And yeah, at that time I was talking about technical stuff, but today this is not a technical talk at all. If you are hoping to see code, please, I'm turning around, leave the room. That is fine, because that's not what you're going to get today. So today I'm going to talk about system of work. I'm going to talk about organizing teams. And I'd like to start with a very, very quick question for you guys. Who in the room is part of an engineering team? Raise your hand. Almost everyone. Who is the room is part of an engineering team whose team composition is static, in the sense you basically work with the same people every quarter, more or less? Please raise your hand. Almost everybody. Who would say that choice has been a conscious choice and something that has been discussed with the team when you formed the team? And who would say, well, actually, we've thought about different alternatives for organizing our work. So if that was a conscious choice and you had a discussion, raise your hand. 2 hands in the room. So today, that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about a different model that we talk continuous reteaming. Maybe 18 months ago, that's where we were with my team, like most of you, static teams. And we've decided to change things. We decided to basically reset and think about a very different way of working. So who am I? My name is Julien. I'm an engineering manager. As I said, I don't write that much code anymore those days. And I'm part of a data engineering team for a company called G-Research. G-Research is a fintech. We forecast financial markets. There's like 600 of us. I'm actually based in London, so I've been living in the UK for the last 4 years. So I'm just visiting today. And you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and plenty of other places. So the agenda for the day is the following. I'm going to try to give you a bit of context, the different phase we went through, the different things we've tried. I'm going to talk about our new model, which I call continuous reteaming, what it is and how you could get started if you're interested. And I'm going to talk about tracking progress, because in this new world, it's actually very different to know what's going to happen within all those dev teams. Finally, I'll have some parting words for you and some further thoughts. So how did that story all start? Well, so like 4 years ago, something around 2015, the way my team and most of the business was organized was pretty much we had one developer equal one part of the system. So this is a simplification, but you could have one guy responsible for the UI, one person in the back end, one person doing DBA stuff, and then you've got your stakeholders. He wants stuff done, great. Talks to the person at the very front of the queue, say, hey, do that thing. That person then asks the back-end person, do that thing for me because I've got a dependency on you, and etc. That person in the middle is probably very unhappy because he's the bottleneck, he's got more work to do, so work is piling on his desk. The person at the front actually is probably also very unhappy because he's constantly going to be blocked by another person. So what that leads is very, very high work in progress. You've got bus factor. If any of those person is not there, is on holiday, or for whatever reason can't work, you're blocked, which means you probably have also very long lead time and queuing. So what do you do at that point? Well, you build product teams. And product team have many advantages. One of those is that you're going to try to get end-to-end ownership across a team, organize it along some kind of business line or something, and yeah, makes life better. Except that sometimes priorities change. But do you change your teams in consequences? Do you move people from team A to team B? Sometimes you do if you've got those massive priority change, but if you're changing every quarter, probably not. So you can end up with a team that has the most high-value backlog, and they're totally understaffed versus the amount of work that they have to do. Was even reading a story about a team like that. It was not even a product team, it was like a feature team. They were the team responsible for the login page. I can tell you the login page was absolutely amazing. Like they spent 2 years polishing it. The blue button was exactly the right shade of blue. It was loading in 50 milliseconds. Who cares? Probably not that many people. But they were responsible for that. So that's what they were doing. And they were not, the team focus did not change to something else. So yeah, you can end up with some people totally overwhelmed by work, and some people that are having a good time and can do a lot of stuff. But what if now the business really wants you to focus all your effort in one part? One of those persons in the other team was probably the tech lead, the engineering manager. What is happening to that person? Now suddenly he's not a tech lead, he's not an engineering manager. There must be a bit of anxiety in that change. So how do you deal with that challenge is an interesting one. So we tried that. That worked for a time. And the two problems we had really was low adaptability to changing demand, what I described, and this very unequal work distribution. So what we did next, we say, well, okay, let's recognize that those teams are going to change, and let's do project teams. So it's just a small variations than before, except that we don't have this very, very long-term ownership of a part of the product. Just say, hey, you people, you're going to tackle that problem. That problem probably has some form of fixed scope. And we're going to accept that at some point or another, this problem is going to be solved, and we're going to start moving people to this other problem. And that's nice, except that now you start having other problems appearing. One of those is that it is super hard to compose teams, because since the teams are constantly changing, or at least on a regular basis, now you need to think about what people want to do, what are their skills. Their skills might be needed in different places. Maybe the person that is doing some front-end development actually wants to be better in the back end, so as the person kind of building those teams, you have to think about all of that. And also, stopping project and transitioning from one to the other is extremely hard, because they never align, never ever. So you start removing people from one project, move them to another. When you do that, you actually realize that those people were actually the people that made the first project tick. So now you've got this long tail of project that you don't manage to hand properly. So it is a massive overhead on the manager, and I personally thought it was like a bit of a nightmare to try to tackle all of that and think about everyone's wishes. So that led us to the next slide that doesn't change. Early 2018, so almost 18 months ago. At that time, this was more or less the situation in my team. We had even more work, and I'd like to just have a quick read at that Dilbert, because that's really how I felt personally. So yeah, does that sound familiar to anyone? Certainly was for me. So yeah, more engineers in the team, more stakeholders, more work, everybody wants more stuff, and our scope at the time is getting bigger because we're successful, we're delivering more things to the business. So at that point, we've got more than 100 pieces of software, everything, you name it, microservices in C# and Kotlin, because we pivoted in the last 2 years. UI, Spark, backend, database, everything, we had it in one way or another. And I was a bit sad, even though we had quite a few successes as a team, because I really, really felt that people were not taking the right amount of ownership. But could they, if they were a bit moved from one project to the other without having that much input into it? And also, how do we scale the team? So, at the time, we're 15. We went up to 20 people in the meantime. So how do you go to 30 in that model? As me as an engineering manager, do I have to again and again move people around? Can I do that with 30 people? Good question. So it was a bit of a time for a reset, and that's when I started to think about, what do we want to aim for? What do we want to optimize for? And the first thing, and probably the most important thing, is sure, we are an engineering team, but our goal is to deliver business impact. If we can do that with software, that is great, but our goal is not to deliver software. Our goal is to help solve a problem in the business. We want to be adaptable to the demand side, as in if the business wants us to shift all our resources from left to right, we should be able to do that if that's the most important thing to do for the company. And also, I want to give opportunity for growth for the people in my team. If someone wants to explore a new part of the stack, they should be able to do that. Certainly want to encourage them. Now, the other thing is that when you've got a big team, you want to find a way to share learnings, and whatever best practice you find on the left-hand side, try to apply them on the right-hand side. So get this collective experience shared and good ideas to bubble up. And last but not least, I did want self-organization. I didn't want to be the bottleneck and the one kind of directing everyone, mostly because I can scale myself and I can spend my time doing other things for the business or otherwise. So those was the main goals. The other thing, and I was super happy to hear Alberto yesterday in the keynote talk about that. The other thing is that I do believe that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are extremely important to keep people motivated. So I wanted to see if there was a system that could basically align with that and push for those three properties. So what you do at that time, you get some inspiration, and there was quite a few interesting things available on the internet. I don't know if anyone read the Valve book, which was published something in 2011, but Valve has a great idea. On every single desk, you've got wheels. You say, well, why would you put wheels on the desk? So that you can move the desk. Why would you move your desk? Because you can take your desk and go work with another team if you want. So quite an extreme idea at the time. I thought there's no way that could work, right? Why would you ever do that? And other things such as Lego, they've got this wonderful event, which was 2 days and 1 day when they put 150 people in the room, and those people all build a roadmap together. Interesting. And last but not least, Dan North, which I was lucky to work with for the last year, has been also a massive source of inspiration on how to organize or work. So let's talk about how that works, continuous reteaming. Do we have any engineering manager in the team or any person that think is some kind of engineering leader in the room? 1, 2, 3, a few hands, yeah. This is the part that's going to get extremely uncomfortable for you. But stay there. This is a leap of faith. Believe in me. Right. So this idea of continuous reteaming all start with a planning day. Very simple thing. We want to take the demand side, the people that want us to do some work. We want to take the supply side, the people who are actually going to do the work, put them in the same room. We shake. At the end of the day, we're going to get a new plan for the quarter. Super easy. But how on earth do you do that in practice? So the first thing, let's look at the recipe for the day. Let's see a bit what's going to look like. So we start with having a breakfast with everyone. Why would you do that? To build relationship. Writing good software, you need actually to involve everyone. So you need to talk to your stakeholders and people from other team. Great. Then we're going to talk about the last quarter achievements. And why would you do that? Well, where are we? What is the state of things? We want to energize everybody, and we want to celebrate the success from the last quarter. There's probably quite a lot of great things that happen. Let's share those. Then we finally want the demand side to pitch what their ideas for the quarter. What do they want us to do in front of everyone so that they provide visibility and everybody is aligned. We're going to have lunch, we're hungry, again, build relationship. And in the afternoon, we're going to start the really interesting part, which is this idea of self-selection and self-organization. To do that, we need some constraints, we need some rules. I'll share about those in a minute. We'll then be able to iterate, do several iterations to basically create those new teams. And as we create those new teams, we'll engage with the stakeholders to make sure this is all a current plan that we can use for the quarter. And at the end, we'll share that with the group of people, communicate and test the plan, make sure it's not entirely crazy, and have drinks to, again, build a relationship. But also, it was hard work, believe me, so it is time to celebrate. So that's a very, very high level. What do we need to succeed? We need some kind of ingredients. The first thing is that you cannot come to your planning day with, this is all the possible things we can do in the next 30 years. It's not going to work. So you need to filter that. And I'm not going to talk about that today, but there is no magical step. You will need to get your stakeholders in the room, and they will need to agree on what are the top priorities for the business. And that's what you will need to present on that day. The second thing is that you need people. So as I said, demand side, it's going to be stakeholders, whether they're in your business or external clients, product owners, PMs, whatever you want to call them, but the people that are kind of representing your customers. And the supply side, which is going to be software engineers, system engineers, ops people. Some of those may actually also be part of the demand side because you may have some initiatives or reduce technical debt or those kind of things that can be a priority. So there's a bit of flexibility there. Then you need a big enough room, and mostly because you're going to have use the walls to put a lot of ideas, put a lot of post-its. You want that room to be far from the office, mostly because you want people to come there and really be focused on solving that problem. This is your one day in the whole quarter where planning happens, so you want people to really be present and not going back to their desk, checking their emails, and etc. And finally, you need those constraints I talked about. So the constraints are really the rule of the game. It is the minimum set of rules that will A, avoid chaos, and B, make self-organization and self-selection possible. So let's look at an example, and those are actually those that we are using mostly. The first thing is that we want all work to get picked or prioritized. Very simple reason. It's not because nobody wants to work on something that it's not a priority for the business. So we just recognize that everything needs to be picked. What can happen, though, is that we will realize more likely than not in the day that we have too much work. It's always like that. So you can deprioritize stuff, but you do that with the stakeholders in the room and tell them, hey, you have to pick. Which one do you pick? We want team size to be not too big, not too small. For us, this is between 3 and 6. Less than 3, it's not really a team. Someone is on holiday or on support, on call, something, and you don't really have a team anymore, just have 1 or 2 person. More than 6, just because we think communication doesn't scale that much, or we'd rather have small teams than big teams. And then we've got other rules, which is sometimes projects continue for more than 1 quarter. That's expected. We're not delivering everything in 3. We always try to deliver something in 3 months so that we have optionality at the end of that quarter. But the business can say, hey, great, you delivered X, now we want X plus 1. So sometimes teams are what we call continuation of a previous quarter. In that case, we just have a rule, which is we want some change, but not everything must change. So at least 1 person must leave the team, 1 person must join, so that we've got some cross-pollination. Another rule you could have, for example, is to say each of those teams should be at least 20%, spending 20% of their time improving the code base, doing Kaizen work. Why not? So those are the ingredients. What does that day look like in practice? So as I mentioned, one of the important parts is the previous quarter achievement. So you spend 5 minutes for each of your team, and to give you an idea, we do that now with 50 people. So we would have roughly 10 teams presenting. Each of those teams are going to spend 5 minutes just telling everybody else what happened, and you really want them to focus on the business impact. Like saying, hey, I've developed this wonderful feature that nobody is using is not what I mean. It's really focus on how this is moving the needle. And you also want those people to tell you, is there anything left of value, at least that we thought we would do that we didn't do, so that you can actually fit that into the afternoon and the demand side, and it gets reprioritized. Make it fun is my advice, because this is really the first step of the day, so you really want people to feel energized. Those are real slides from some of my teams, like they're all more ridiculous than others, but that's good. People laugh and they really enjoy it. Now, second big part is the demand side. So you want your stakeholders there in front of you, telling everybody, why does it matter? Why do that work now? Why not in 6 months? Why is it a priority for the business? What is the context? And that's extremely important. You actually rarely have that in front of a group of 50 people or other. You want them to focus on the business impact. Every time I work with stakeholders, they always come up to you and say, hey, I want this grid with this blue button. The button has to be blue, not green, not whatever. This is not the problem. We don't care about your to-do list. We want to understand what is the expected business impact. Why do you want that grid? What problem are you trying to solve? And the other thing, and that's even more important, you want to ask them, what does a great quarter look like? The reason why you ask that question is that stakeholders, they've got this great vision for their product area. That's fine. If you actually ask them what would be great at the scale of the next 3 months, you suddenly get a very, very different answer, because they do realize that those things takes time. So this is a way to kind of manage their own expectations. So do that. Finally, we're going to have Q&A with the room, which means everybody will be able to question the stakeholders and get the context at the very, very source. With all that, we create post-it, put them everywhere on the walls, so that in the afternoon we can start grouping the work. So how does the afternoon work? Pretty simple, as I said. We've got all those post-its everywhere. People will start moving them and grouping the things together. So I say, maybe those two stakeholders, actually there is an overlap in what they need. Maybe we should tackle that together. And then people will start creating teams around those ideas, what we called, what I call SLAM teams. So those SLAM teams stands for self-managed, lean, audacious, and multidisciplinary, or cross-functional. We really want to have teams that have end-to-end ownership on a problem, and we want them to have, as much as possible, no dependency. You will never have zero dependency, but if you can get your ops people in the team, great. If you can get your design person, UX in the team, great. Do that. That is the way you get impact. That is the way you get things done. So for each of those teams, we want to end up the day with something that looks like that on the right. So some kind of template to be filled, which is, what is the team name? Who is part of the team? What is the mission of the team? What are you trying to tackle? Who are your stakeholders? What is your capacity? So how many people a week can you work on this project during the quarter? Because take into account holidays and things like that. We want SWAGs, which stands for scientific what-else guesses of how much work you have. So we're not trying to estimate very accurately the amount of work, because we focus on the business impact. And we accept that there's going to be a discovery process about what exactly needs to be done. And more often than not, we start the quarter with the absolute wrong idea about how to achieve that. Ideally, you've got some risk and dependencies listed, depends if you've got the time, and draft OKRs. So this is not a talk about OKRs. So I will give you the 30-second intro to OKRs, but I really recommend reading that book from John Doerr. OKRs stands for Objectives and Key Results. The idea of OKRs is that your objective is going to be moonshot, so like super ambitious. Each of your key results is how you're going to measure that you're making progress towards that objective. And you give it a score at the end, which is from 0 to 1. So one of your key results could be lower latency from 200 millisecond to 100 millisecond. One would be 100 millisecond at the end of the quarter. If you don't touch the latency at all, well, you've got a 0. Too bad. So as I said, in the afternoon, we're going to iterate to build those teams. So people are going to start talking to each other, find the area where they want to work, try to understand a bit more what needs to be done. And at some point, just take a post-it, put their name, and say, yes, that's where I want to work. And they will also fill the template that I talk about. The very important thing is that, as I said, you want to iterate, and you want the iteration to be shorter and shorter, because that brings some form of sense of urgency to people, and they actually start to settle somewhere, say, okay, I can see that time is passing, so yes, I'm going to put myself there, and I'm going to start, I'm going to work with those people. So at each iteration, you basically stop, and the thing you do is to say, did we meet all the constraints? Yes, glorious, so the teams are not too big, not too small. Is there too much work somewhere? Probably is the short answer. So do we need to remove work, or do we need to move work to another team? Possibly. Is there any other concerns that stakeholders have that we need to address? Like maybe, for example, you've got a team of 6 people, and they're all back-end developers, and really that you've got a massive front-end component to that project. So if that's the case, you would just highlight that to the role room and say, hey, this is the problem I'm noticing, and that's it. You don't do anything else. What will happen is that in the next iteration, people will actually start tackling that problem themselves. So it's really, as an engineering manager especially, you're there just to highlight problem, not to solve them. Believe me, trust me, people want to succeed, they want the company to succeed, they will adapt and they will do what is right. There are a few things we've not achieved though. The first one, it's super important to recognize that we've not achieved a static plan. I mean, if everything stayed the same for 3 months, great. In my company, that's rarely the case. We always have things coming in the middle of the quarter. So that's a fact of life. We're not changing anything about that. There's different options. What we tend to do in our case is that sometimes we end up with what we call some kind of BAU team, which is a team that is going to be buffering those kind of requests for everybody else. You can have different model, but yeah, do recognize that, yeah, things will change. If the plan is probably obsolete at the end of the day already. Yeah, that's a fact of life. The second thing we need is choose what we call a delivery lead, and I will describe that role in a minute. The third thing we need is finalize the OKRs. So the OKRs is the system that is going to help know exactly what's happening in all of those teams. So it's super important to spend 2 days to actually figure out what exactly you're tackling and make sure everybody is aligned. Otherwise, people will diverge and there won't be any alignment between stakeholders, engineering managers, and engineers. So there's a few things I learned the hard way while doing this process for now almost 18 months. The first thing is that the way you introduce the planning day really, really matters. We've been doing Agile for the last 15 years. Everybody understands that, yes, we need to work closely with stakeholders. And still, when you say to your stakeholders, can you come up for a day to work with us on what we're going to do in the next 3 months? You've got a lot of them like, really? Why do I need to come for a day? We already built our 5 years roadmap. You already know what you're supposed to do. Yeah, well, we still need you because obviously this 5 years roadmap is your great vision, but we want to know what we're going to do in the next 3 months, and we really want you to help us figure out what matters and what doesn't. So they really need to show up. If you can't get your stakeholders in the room, you're already set up for failure. Now, the second thing, and this one is even harder, as I said, if you're some kind of engineering manager, tech lead, something like that, you've probably been raised in some kind of pretty much command and control culture. So it's very easy to fall back to your previous habit, which is, hey, we're going to go to this quarterly planning, but I'm kind of going to pre-form the teams. That is not the point. That really, really, really doesn't work. And that's where, as an engineering manager, you have to really do this leap of faith, which is trust people to do the right thing. It does work, but it's hard. And I was actually talking with a coworker of mine about that, and we were kind of disagreeing because I was like, as an engineering manager, but also I was an individual contributor before, I would rather choose what I work on. He was saying that no, it was actually in his teams, everybody wanted him to decide. I don't think that's true. I think if I do a quick poll in this room, I'm pretty sure everybody would rather choose themselves than being assigned on the project. So fighting that culture is really, really difficult because you do lose power as an engineering manager. So is that a success? So that's a survey I did in my team. Basically, a question I'll asking about many things is, should we keep doing it or should we stop? Especially if we're talking about a one-day meeting. People are not going to say yes if they don't see value. In my case, the response is overwhelmingly yes, let's continue to do that. I'll be honest with you, in the case of my sister team where I had this discussion with the other manager where they don't have that much flexibility, then it's not exactly the same result. They're a lot more mixed, but that's also because they're not really following the process. So what are the downside of that approach? There's quite a few of them too. Nothing is perfect, it's all about trade-off. Those are the three that I'd like to highlight. You've got a challenge about long-term ownership of things. That model doesn't address that at all. So how do you tackle that is almost orthogonal. I do think that the system actually only works with software that fits in your head, e.g. microservices. If you've got a big monolith, it's really hard to get self-organization and self-selection around that because everybody is going to actually work on the same code base and create a big mess. So maybe you need more coordination if you've got a big monolith. But if you've got a very microservices-based architecture, that is a lot easier. And as I said, this is a massive leap of faith, and not everybody is able to do that. So we had that day, we've got our plan. What else needs to happen? So the first thing is that we need to form the teams. So on the next day, they will gather. And one of the things we will need is find what we call a delivery lead. A delivery lead, almost like a product owner, is really someone that is going to keep the team focused on what is the objective. Is almost the owner of the OKRs, making sure that everybody knows what the team is trying to achieve. This is not a tech lead. I mean, this can be a tech lead in the sense a tech lead person can also have the role of the delivery lead, but the two roles are very different. This is not about telling the team how you do the things technically. It's really just having the North Star for the quarter. And more likely than not, this is going to be one of the main person communicating with stakeholders. Not necessarily the only one, but possibly the person is going to try to keep everybody in sync. And I've kind of put the exact description of the role that we have in my team there as a reference. Now we're doing self-selection, we're doing self-organization. Well, we can take that to the next level. Delivery lead in my team is actually elected by the team. And you say, wow, that's crazy. Why would you have to do that? But actually, it does work. And there's a few interesting findings there, which is, in my line of work, I don't know, maybe that's just the companies I've been part of, rarely people want to be kind of, project manager or have some kind of component like that. Most of the engineers won't just write code. In my case, everybody in the team is interested in being a delivery lead. And I think one of the reasons is that you can try a very, very different role for 3 months. You're not committing to anything. So that's allow you to discover a totally new side, develop new skills without saying, hey, yes, I'm going to be a PM forever or something like that. And also people tend to actually elect the person that wants it more, which is interesting because if you want it more than everybody else, you're more motivated. Therefore, you're more likely to do a good job at it. So the other thing is that once those teams are formed, we're going to have to track progress. So how do you track progress with something that's totally self-organized? So that's where the OKRs come back. So for each of the OKRs, what we're going to do on a weekly basis is update the progress that we're doing. Are we closer to achieving what we want? And more importantly, we are going to update our confidence level of achieving that thing. Because sometimes, you've got a long lead time to actually get some metrics moving because you need to deliver in production, you need to start getting users, something. So it might take time. But your confidence can actually change week by week. And that leads to very interesting discussions because sometimes you realize that you have a conversation with your team and they say, yeah, it's totally on track. We are super happy. The feature will be there next week. Confidence level, 70%. As an engineering manager, my first question is, okay, I don't understand. Just told me that everything was on track. They're super happy. I mean, that sounds like a 95%, right? Why is it 70? Oh, yeah, we've got this dependency on hardware. We're not sure that our hardware is going to be there anytime this quarter. Right. So basically, having that number and matching that with the conversation you have allow you to detect those discrepancies and really go to the source of what is happening. And this is also a very good way to convey that maybe you're actually abandoning some of those KRs. Because you might say in that case, well, this one at the bottom, it's lowering just because timing is passing and we're not doing anything about it. So by doing that, you can have very early a conversation with your stakeholders and say, well, what's not going to happen? That's a fact of life. But at least, you're choosing that and you can have that conversation. It's not something that you discover at the very end of the quarter. So the question we ask every week is, what was achieved last week? What are you focused on next week? Are you confident that you can achieve that key result? Sometimes the answer might be very, very quickly, no, it's 0. We'll never achieve that because we actually discovered something entirely different. Maybe you should rephrase your KR if it's early in the quarter. And do we need to change anything? Do we need to move people around because maybe a team is actually performing super well on their key result, while another one is struggling? So that's back to my point about things will change. We can still try to adapt the team if we think that a team now has more capacity than needs be. So I've got a few parting words for you. And more often than not, when I hear that some teams are doing agile, this is really what they mean. In their business, they've got different teams following Scrum, XP, Kanban, and some of those teams will have different maturity level. But is that agile? And especially, is that agile when on top of you've got a manager or a PM that is driving the work? Is that agile when people cannot move from left to right to adapt to whatever is the most important thing for the business? I'm not entirely sure. And is that way of working also encourage autonomy, mastery, and purpose? Autonomy could be if your teams are really self-contained and don't have any dependency. Mastery, well, maybe you've been part of that team for a long time, and maybe you already know everything about what is needed to do that job, so you're maybe not progressing that much. And purpose, it goes back to my example about the login page. Yes, you can make an awesome login page, but is that really the most important thing for the business? Maybe not. So if we look at continuous reteaming, I think this is an answer, not the answer, but at least it can help on some of those aspects. Because if you look at self-organization, self-organization will probably mean that you won't have massive dependencies between your team because people will actually try to pull the resources they need. So that's good for autonomy. Self-selection obviously is great for mastery because that means you can choose what you're going to work on. There are some constraints, but you still have a lot more options than if you were just put in a project. That is also very, very good for purpose because now you can pick the one thing that matters most to you. So that's very good. And last but not least, having business impact and OKRs instead of having this massive to-do list, the massive backlog that we all have, just having this kind of, instead, this is the North Star. You're going to self-organize, and if you want to build a backlog within the 3 months, do that. If you want to work another way, do that. But that is the metrics we care about. That is also, a great way to get aligned on the purpose and to be motivated by that. So, we all like to think of ourselves as, yeah, we're part of this wonderful agile team. In my mind, agile is all about experimenting. It's all about trying new things and finding, the best way that works. So I have a challenge for you, and my challenge is the following. Go back to your teams, have a chat with your teammates, have a chat with your manager, and ask them, the way we're working, is it actually the right one? Are we, having static teams, is that really something we want, or is this just the way we've been doing things for the last 5 years, and we're just, perpetrating the same thing again and again and again? So have that conversation. Show them some of those slides, and ask them, do we still want to work that way? Yes, maybe that's great for us. Or do we want to change something? And maybe one of those options could be try something a lot more dynamic, like continuous reteaming. So that's my challenge to you. Try that. And on that, thank you very much for your time today. So we now have got time for questions, and I just have one favor to ask you before, which is do not forget to use the app to give me feedback, whether it's good, whether it's bad. I would like to hear it, so yeah, please give feedback. Yes, questions?
How do you manage to keep the quarterly time frame as unobtrusive as possible and as natural as possible? You could easily set yourselves deadlines that are quite artificial.
Yeah, so I'll try to repeat the question. So basically, how do you keep the 3 months cadence, and how do you not end up with this 3 months cadence being totally artificial and a bad way to group work? That's a great question. So I think the first thing is to understand the reason for the 3 months cadence, and fundamentally the reason is to aligned teams in the sense that gives you a point where you've got optionality and you can decide to do something else. And B, it's to actually give you those options in the sense you can say after 3 months, do we keep investing in that thing? Or actually, it didn't deliver what we thought it would, so we do something else. And so part of the answer to your question is we are not saying that every single project forever will take 3 months. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that 3 months is a long enough time that you should be able to deliver some value. And if you can't deliver some value in 3 months with a team of 6 people, find a better way. Because you don't want a project to last 6, 9, 12 months without delivering anything in prod. It's just a recipe for disaster. Now, if your project lasts less than 3 months, that's okay. Group other things in that team and say, first part, we're going to do X, second part, we're going to do Y. Just be very, very clear about the priorities on those 2 things, because you don't want the team to actually start working on those 2 things in parallel. Or otherwise, maybe instead of having a team of 6 working on those 2 things, you should really have 2 teams of 3. That's also totally possible. So not everything fits into 3 months. It's just really a cadence to force decisions. And the other thing I would add is one of the side effects I notice is that having this kind of 3 months deadline really gives people focus. When they don't have that deadline, they say, oh, it's fine. We still have 6 months, whatever, we can take our time. When they know that the team might be disbanded in a few weeks' time, suddenly they get things done, and suddenly they focus on, okay, what is the thing we can deliver? So it's, I find it extremely useful to get people to remember that you're just not there to write software, but to deliver something. And maybe that something will be actually smaller scope than we anticipated, but at least that something will be in prod and will deliver value to someone. Yes?
I have 2 questions about the 500 others that I may have to kid if you want. First thing is, how do you manage quality? How do you manage ownership on the long term? And the second thing is, I believe that good teams can become great teams with a bit of fine-tuning and patience. How do you think about it?
Okay. So different questions. So the first one, how do we manage quality long-term ownership? So quality, long-term ownership, there are different aspects, but for quality, quite a few of those projects that we do have a component of, let's make the system architecture better at the same time. I'm a big fan of, instead of having just, we're going to rewrite A and, the business see feature X at the beginning and see exactly the same feature X at the end, but the software architecture is better. I'm not a fan of that. What I'd like to do is say, hey, you want this new feature? Great. We're going to develop that new feature at the same time, clean some of the mess. It's not going to be perfect. So that's kind of tend to tackle quality. And the other thing I mentioned is that you could say, hey, we're spending 20% of our time just doing improvement on the code base. That can be a rule. You just have to negotiate it with your business. Long-term ownership is a harder problem, and I'm not sure I have a great answer. So every single project team that we have for the duration of a quarter is still attached to a bigger team. So in that case, my team of 20, and that bigger team at the end own that thing. So we still reattach everything to some kind of home team that will eventually be responsible for that thing. That's one of the reasons why we want that cross-pollination when project lasts for a long amount of time, because we start to get a lot more shared ownership of the code base that way, and we think that's a reasonable way to address the problem. So that was your first question. Sorry, I forgot your second. Remind me.
Good teams can become great teams.
Yes.
Fine-tuning and patience.
Yes, maybe. So the people think a lot about Tuckman model about different stage of teams. So always get that wrong, but there is 4 stages of teams according to Tuckman, which is forming, storming, norming, and whatever is the last one, performing. Yeah. So the idea is basically you have to go through those 4, and ultimately you end up in that place where the team is wonderful and everything works great. So I've got a counter example. Who here has seen a hackathon or being part of a hackathon? Raise your hand. So quite a lot of people. who would say after those day or 2 day or whatever the duration, you've seen amazing thing delivered in the hackathon? No, quite a few people. Not that much, actually. Well, okay. I've got a different experience. I've seen amazing things delivered in hackathon. They're not production ready, but you've got people that were not working together for 2 days, build a massive POC, and you can see the energy in that team. It did not take them 3 months to get that level of energy and communication. So that's something to think about. But again, our people are still part of a bigger team, so they all work together at some point or another. So we kind of have what you mean, but just not at the 3 to 6 at a higher level, I'd say. Yes.
During the planning stage, you may have a situation where your supply and demand don't match. So it's a team that no one is interested in joining.
Yep.
How do you deal with that?
Yes, great question. So the question is, what if your supply and demand don't match? What if you've got work that nobody wants to do, more or less? So my experience there is that, especially as an engineering manager, you tend to project your own desires on everybody else. I like to do microservices on greenfield architecture, so by definition, everybody must like that. Turns out, if you've got a big enough team, you have people that actually love working on the monolith in brownfield stuff. Why? Because anything they tweak, it might be a struggle to tweak it, but it's certainly going to have a massive impact because it's used by everybody else in the company. So in practice, that doesn't happen. And I will just ask you to trust me. Every quarter, I've got the same example where I see, well, that project presented by demand, I'm like, oh, that's going to be a problem. Nobody will want to work on that. Every quarter, I've got some people that are like, no, I understand why it matters. I'm going to work on that thing. Yeah, sure, it might be a bit less technically interesting or whatever. They still jump on it because this is their way to really have impact at the company level. Everybody wants to do great. So if you've got a good purpose, people start realizing that, yes, the goal is not just to write this wonderful piece of software that nobody cares about. Yeah. Yes, the back, one.
How do you pick your stack, the technical stack? Do you have like a policy to have some
yeah, so the question is, how do we pick our tech stack? So in my mind, that's mostly orthogonal to this whole discussion. It's not a massive free-for-all, for sure. I mean, we've got a good baseline. When we do microservices for us, we write them in Kotlin with Spring Boot. Teams can diverge if they want to, but they would need to convince everybody else in the team, and in that case, they will also probably need to convince other people in the kind of wider group. So they could, but the rule I give to people is, yeah, sure, bring a new technology, but you need to convince me or other people that it does actually bring significant value. If it's just, hey, we want to get the one extra person by bringing totally new database that's going to have to be managed by a team of DBA later, it has to be, there needs to be some kind of feature, something that makes that essential to succeeding at the project level. So there is a lot of autonomy, but we have a good baseline, so people tend to follow the kind of paved road that has been established and only diverge when they've got good reasons to. But they also do improve that that experience across all the teams. Yes? How do we deal with bugs? So we've got always have 2 people in the group of 20 that rotate through the support role. So that's to tackle any bug that is not on any kind of project that is currently worked on. If you've got a team that is working on a project or in an area of the code and there are bugs coming in that way, they will deal with it. So it's really for everything else. Yes? There's a bit of everything. I'm not sure there is a distinctive patterns. There are some people that As I said, at some point, I like to do front end, so they're going to gather it on the project where there is some actual front end work. There are indeed some people that want to work with others, and then there are some people that just only worry about the business impact and don't really mind at all about the technical aspects. So we really have a bit of everything. Yeah, I can't really think of one universal reason for going into one team. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, so the question is, is there any consequences due to the fact that since the teams are short-lived, then maybe people don't want to invest in kind of building relationship or maybe investing on the code base. So investing on the code base, as I said, ultimately, the code is still owned by someone, by your team. Ultimately, you will still be part of the support at some point or another in the future to, fix any bugs. So you're actually incentivized to not make a big mess. Same thing, I'm kind of working on the assumption that people will actually like to, engage with each other. Certainly, we've built a team in my company around that. I don't really have a lot of lone wolf in the team just because we almost filter for that. We want an environment that is very collaborative. So in practice, we don't have that problem. And, every quarter we get people to sit together, so we reseat everybody. So it's kind of hard to not, build relationship. I've not came across that. Right? More. Oh, yeah, we don't choose them. It's just a rota. So everybody's on support 2 weeks, for 2 weeks in a row. We've got 2 people constantly. So in my team, it's 16, 17 currently. That means you're going to be on support 2 weeks every 3 months, and that's just a rotation. Now, the other thing we could do is having this, as I said, at some point, having a BAU team, which is a team that just group all the small work doesn't fit very well. Those people self-select again. And one of the reasons you may end up in that team is you've got 1 month of holiday coming. Therefore, that the next quarter for you is going to be a bit weird. You don't really want to be on a project if you're going to be on holiday for a lot of time. So that might actually be a very good reason for you to join that team. Same thing in practice. This is not really a problem because you have the people that like to do that. Some people like go through the list of bugs or whatever and just fix those. Yeah. No, we do it those days as 50. So 20 is my team, but we do it in my water group, with 50 people. I don't think you would have just one quarterly planning for 500 people for sure. I can't see that working. But as I said, I've been working with Dan North. We've been doing kind of similar thing with 150 people. Actually, when we started it at the time with just 15. It was like, I've seen it work at 60, never at 15. So I'm not sure, this is going to work for you. But I think up to 100, I have no doubt that it can work. Again, assuming the engineering managers do that leap of faith and let the self-organization really happen. Beyond 100, I don't know. I would start splitting them into different group of people, I would say. More questions? No? Thank you, everybody, for your time.